Hello, impressive listeners, and welcome to a new episode of Live Your Impressivity Show. I'm Alex Baditza, your host, and I'm really excited to bring you another adventure on this podcast, especially when it comes to journaling. Today we're talking about creativity. Isn't this amazing? I find that creativity is a big fuel in my life, and I know that so many of you are also interested in how to enhance your creativity because this is a big part of our lives. Today, I will be joined by a very special guest, David Chislett. David is the creativity activator. He was born in Britain, raised in South Africa, and now lives in the Netherlands. He is a really creative person. Whatever creative outlet you can think of, he has done it. He's a published author, a poet, a musician, an artist. He even shares with us about his projects in sculpture and music production. He also is an entrepreneur for over 25 years, and he teaches individuals, teams, and companies how to get unstuck by getting better at utilizing and improving their creative capacities. In this episode, we dive deeper into the neuroscience, into how we can use journaling for creativity, and what exercises we can actually write in the pages of our journal. Are you ready? Get a pen and paper and start taking notes. And let's meet David. Hi, David, and welcome to Live Your Impressivity Show. How are you doing?
Hi, Alexandra. I'm very well, thank you, and very happy to be here. What about you?
I'm well as well, and I'm super excited that we're going to talk about this awesome topic because it's one of my favorites, creativity. And I love that you said in your presentation that you are a creativity activator, which is super awesome, and I can't wait to hear more about it. But I would like to start with the basics and really go to the first thing about creativity, because I remember I was reading at the beginning of the year that creativity is one of the top 10 skills that the employment services require in 2021 and probably from now on. So I'm curious, what would be your definition of creativity and what does it include?
All right. Well, look, I don't have a formal definition of creativity because the academics and the researchers have been trying to come up with one since the 1950s, and nobody agrees, even up until today. But what I can say to you is that at its bottom base level, in its essence, the creative skill is our ability to join dots, to see or to make connections between data points, between pieces of information, which often results in a new thought or a new perspective or a different thought or a different perspective. So if you think about it, that's what we all do all the time. You know, if you're thinking about what will I have for lunch tomorrow, you are engaging with a scenario that doesn't exist. And you've got various dots, you've got time, you've got what's in the fridge, you've got what's available in your local supermarket or what takeaway is nearby. And you join those dots to make a story about what lunch will look like in the future. That's creativity. But it's so everyday that most of us don't consider that to be creativity. But since the onset of sophisticated brain scans, neurology tells us that the process that happens in your brain, the three very specific areas that light up when you're even having an everyday creative thought like that, are exactly the same areas of the brain which light up when an entrepreneur comes up with a fantastic new solution, or a jazz musician is freestyling, or when a business consultant comes up with the solution for a client and saves them millions of dollars. The same physiological thing is taking place in your brain.
So on top of creativity, there's also a boost of excitement and that feeling of I'm the superhero and I saved the day.
Well, I think that's one of the really interesting characteristics of creativity is that it's inherently positive. You know, it's even when you're breaking down a complex idea, which sounds negative, there's always a construction phase. There's always putting it together in a new way or taking a piece out and expanding it. And that tends to have a positive impact on our emotional state as well. It makes us happy, makes us feel good. Yeah, a bit like we're wearing our underpants outside of our trousers and we're suddenly a superhero.
That's true. We can be creative all day long. And I really love that, because I think people look at creativity as something that is outside of them and something that is very difficult to achieve. And I would like to actually know more about this scientific part and neuroscience. Can you give us a little bit more examples on what happens and how we can boost that part of our brains for creativity?
For sure. I think what most people are acquainted with is this idea that human beings are either left-brained or right-brained. And if you're right-brained, you're more creative. And the left brain is more rational, process-driven, 1 + 1 = 2. And right brain is more inference and extrapolation and creative, basically. And so we tend to talk about creative people as being right-brained. But what the brain scans have told us is that 3 distinct areas light up. Sure, the area we kind of know or associate with the ability to fantasize and be creative, but also the default mode, like our processing capacity, and also our high intellectual rational center. And I think this is why people who are not used to working with highly creative people get a little bit freaked out by them, because we tend to be able to flick-flack from, yes, A, B, C, D, rational, to boom, crazy idea, and then back again. Because actually we're not flick-flacking. It's just that the emphasis is drifting from the one area of the brain to the other. And because creative people are used to dealing with unknowns, with what ifs, with kind of, vague, ambiguous stuff, they don't find it so threatening to step away from the facts and into the possibilities and then back again. And the neurology, the brain scans really kind of explain that nicely, is that even when you are seriously daydreaming, being creative about what the future is going to look like, your actual rational center is engaged.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that's interesting, because what that should tell you is that not only can everyone be creative, but we are all creative. It's just quite possible that it is so natural to us that we haven't really noticed it. And because we don't have a specific skill set, i.e., we're not an artist, we don't believe we're creative. And that for me is one of the biggest stumbling blocks. Is people have this obsession that being artistic is the only that's creativity. It's not. That's art. That's a product of creativity.
Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned this distinction, because it's exactly where my next question wanted to go. Because I hear this a lot from people who are saying, I'm not creative, I don't have any talents, and nobody in my family is an artist. And my question to you was, is there such a thing as being born with creativity, or is it something that can be learned?
We're definitely born being creative. Here's a lovely example for you. When you learn something, what happens? You on a physiological level, again, thank you, brain scientists, you lay down a new synaptic pathway in your head. A new physical structure emerges. Hello, that's creative, right? It's new. Something new has emerged. And by internalizing something, you are changing the way you see the world. You're adapting. Again, that's creative. And then when you use it, you're joining the dots available to you in a new way, because you now have a new dot. So that is a hardwired capacity of the human brain. One of the things that's interesting about our consciousness is not so much that we're conscious, because a cat is also conscious, but that we are self-conscious. And it's almost as if that self-consciousness is what gives us the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking, or how something might look differently. And that's creativity. So if we were not creative, could we be intelligent? Because how would Einstein have thought, wow, there must be a way to describe the physical universe? I think it's probably like this, and then test until he gets there. that imaginative leap into the idea that there may be something, which ended up being E equals MC squared, there may be something out there and I'm going to work towards it. That's creativity. So if Einstein was the most intelligent man ever born, which he probably wasn't, he must also be the most creative.
Mm.
And that's the part where it kind of gets lost in translation, where our cultural norms are so preoccupied with art that we completely overlook the fact that, you know, getting lost and finding your way home, or getting stuck in a traffic jam and inventing a new route, or being at work and the tool you need to do a job is broken, the scanner's not working. So you go, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh, well, I can take a photograph on my phone, and then I can Bluetooth that to my computer, and then I can print it on someone. That's being creative. It's called problem solving. And we all do it every single day. So it's inherent. I do, however, believe that some people lean into it and maximize it more than others. But I also believe that some people are incredibly creative, but because they're chartered accountants, nobody believes it.
This actually made me think about a big misconception that I see in advertising agencies, for instance, where they have these separate departments of strategy and business, and then creatives and designers and copywriters, and they all look at each other as if they're from a different planet. And I think this is exactly what you were saying, you know, that no one is just right side brained or left side brained, and there should be a better connection, and you know, for them to complete each other and to complement each other.
Yeah, the truth of our universe is that it is a complex place. Notice, not complicated, complex. Right? There are many levels, there are many moving parts, and everything is joined together in some kind of open-ended system. You know, systems don't start at point A and finish at point D, and that's it. You know, the end of a process is always really hard to measure because it's somehow connected to what happens next. It's open-ended. And so this whole silo approach to business, oddly enough, beautifully manifested by your example of the creative advertising industries, denies that things exist in open systems, and they're trying to silo even creative thought. One of the people I do a lot of work with is a marketing strategist. And when I first met her, she said to me, oh, I'm not creative, I just create strategies. I was like, you just said create, you're creative. And it was such a moment for her where she suddenly went, oh, but yeah, actually that is a creative process. You know, you're given inputs and you use your experience, your dots, and you look at the dots you're given, and you literally, like those little kiddie drawings you used to get, you join the dots to make a new shape, a new form, a new direction, a new strategy. So, you know, business is highly creative. I think it's just, for some reason, I think the personality traits of high creatives are deemed undesirable by command and control style management. And so it needs to be marginalized so that you can keep command and control over people. And therefore, no one really wants to acknowledge their creativity in case they become seen as weird, unmanageable, unruly, difficult, opinionated, etc., etc., etc.
Yes, I think this is a very good point that you're making. And this is also probably a good way to remind people who are listening that you don't have to be ashamed of showing your creativity, because in fact, it's a superpower, and it's something that you should be proud of manifesting out in the world, and not being seen as a burden, or, you know, being as an outsider that, oh, you're creative, you're weird, you should go in the corner.
Yeah. Look, I like the fact that you use the word outsider, because quite often what is deemed valuable about the creative act is that it brings something that was outside the shared experience into it, thereby enriching it and changing it. But what is difficult about this is that if you bring something into the shared experience that lies so far from the shared experience, people will just reject it. And then to all intents and purposes, that creative act is worthless. And a great example of this happened like 10 or 15 years ago when Google came up with the Google Glass, the wearable camera, you know, connected to the internet. And that was just too weird for us 15 years ago. I mean, people who walked into restaurants wearing Google Glass were physically assaulted, they were thrown out. Like, it made people seriously unhappy. That idea of surveillance, of willingly sharing everything you see with whoever, the Illuminati, was too much for us. What's interesting is that Google Glass is now a highly viable product in factory warehouses and logistics services, because people are wearing it and they just have to look at everything for it to be itemized and launched. So the product, the idea was not a bad idea. There's no such thing as bad ideas, but it was badly timed. It was too far from our curve. It was too scary for us to accept it. Or maybe it was put in front of the wrong category of people. And quite often that's what's wrong with ideas. It's not the idea in itself, but where it's being put down, who it's being shared with.
So is it creativity, maybe in a very high level, that is part of visionaries? Visionaries have to have this high creativity, but somehow they kind of have to tone it down or bring it into the world at the right time? Or what do you think would be the best balance to kind of make it happen for visionaries to not feel outsiders? Because I think in this context, they would feel as outsiders.
Well, I think that's the thing. We love branding people gurus or visionaries or genii or all of this wonderful stuff. And then by doing that, we push them to the peripheries of the social experience. And because we push them to the peripheries of experience, they then have experiences that we don't have, which lead them to conclusions that we can't reach. And so it's almost as if the categorization of someone as a genius or being special or being a visionary forces them into the kind of isolation which results in ideas that are too scary for us to adopt. Whereas if we were able to just say, hey, I see what you're doing, you're being creative, you're joining the dots. It's like, I do that too, but okay, what you're doing is in a different area, and I find that scary. But instead we don't do that. We love to say, oh, they're special. Nobody else can do that. And I think that's kind of what results in this disconnect. And, we love also to look back and say, oh, Van Gogh was a visionary, didn't sell a painting in his lifetime, but, influenced so many painters afterwards, as if thereby anointing him with some kind of sainthood of advanced creativity, when in actual fact, what he was doing was just an extrapolation of what everyone else around him was doing. And it came up with in community with those people who he used to argue with and drink with and laugh with every single day. It's just that his unique expression of it was different. And because it was different, it became influential, which in the long term made it socially acceptable. And I think typically, and especially it's happening more and more now in our society, our perspective is too short term. We want quarterly rewards for things that are proved to have value right now. Mm-hmm. And actually the things that have the most value quite often have no value right now.
Yeah, I think being creative and being different, as you so beautifully expanded on this, is a really positive thing that people shouldn't be afraid of. Being creative and being different. I love that. So I want to go back a little bit to you, David, Creativity Activator. I was reading in your bio because you are saying you are a musician, you write poetry, you're an author, speaker, trainer. You are so highly creative on all of these levels. And I would like to know, do you have a favorite creative outlet out of these?
Well, I mean, I have a higher skill set in some of them than others. So for example, I've been writing poetry for 40 years. And as a result, I enjoy it because I can look at what I do and technically I can go, actually, that's not bad, that's good. But I love playing my guitar and I love music, but technically my skill set is nowhere near the league of my music playing. So my experiences of the different areas of creativity are fulfilling, but they're quite different. I enjoy the music for different reasons than I enjoy writing poetry. Maybe because of the hugely different level of my skills in those environments. So no, you know what I just like? I just like that moment when you go, there's an answer, or there's an idea. And it doesn't really matter to me whether that's in a conversation with something, the penny drops and the lights go on, or whether it's writing a poem or coming up with a piece of music on guitar.
Oh, that's so awesome. Do you have a creative process or a ritual or routine around creativity?
Well, yeah, I do. It's one of the interesting contradictions about all of this is because in order to be recognized as being creative in any field, that inherent creative capacity, which we all have, if you accept my previous arguments, that's not the point. The point is, what skill set is it expressed through? So if you want to become well known, or you want to be recognized in any way at anything in this world, your skill set, your technical, physical skill set needs to be very highly honed. So what that means is that you need to practice a lot. You have to reserve time. So that's my routine. I have, hours of the day which are set aside for writing. And I come back every day, and during that time I write, which means that when the aha moment happens, and because of what I've been reading or people I've been speaking to, I have a realization, I'm able to express it in a far more clear, easy to understand, powerful, impactful way, because my writing skills set is so high. So notice, I'm not saying that it's about improving my creativity in writing. No, it's about improving the skill so that the capacity for creativity can be expressed adequately. We love this idea when it comes to sports. I don't think anyone thinks that Messi was just born a genius and who can run onto the football field and do what he does every match without ever practicing. We know he practices a lot, and we think that's part of the reason why he's so good. Why don't we accept that about, Picasso? Picasso made something like 100,000 paintings. He's famous for like 40. That's not genius level delivery. That's average level delivery. But because he made so much stuff, he heightened his chances of ever creating something that would be world changing. And so he did. And so most of us don't buy into this idea of practice, repetition, and routine when it comes to anything to do with creative thinking, because we're so hooked on the myth of it being outside inspiration, genius level, that's not me, magic, Harry Potter, bleh, that we don't bother to set up our skill set to deliver.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because I think there is exactly this misconception of having to practice for your creativity. And this reminds me of Stephen Pressfield's book. And he says exactly this, that, you don't find creativity somewhere outside. Creativity finds you when you're actually there, sitting down and practicing and writing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, to give a really commercial example, Stephen King, in his book on writing, says, I literally sit at my writing desk from the same time in the morning to the same time in the afternoon, Monday to Friday, every day of the week. And he says, because I do that, what happens is that as my bum hits the chair, my writing brain comes online. I don't have to wait for inspiration. I don't have to think too much about it. I am Pavlov's dog. This is a habituated behavior. My brain goes into the creative mind state. The taps open. I'm able to see the connections because I've trained myself physically to do so.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's so accurate. And for someone who is listening and maybe they're not really in the creative realm, or they don't have something that they need to be creative all the time, or at least as they perceive it in their work.
What are you saying now?
And they still want to kind of bring more creativity in their life. And as you were saying, it's like a muscle. We want to practice this creative muscle. How can we do this on a daily basis in a way that is enhancing for our creativity?
All right. There's actually quite a few things you can do. Number one is you've got to commit yourself to lifelong learning. You've got to always be joining the dots. What tends to happen to adults is, you go through school and maybe you were whatever, creative or rebellious or it doesn't really matter. And then you go to university, and then you go to get a job, and now you're qualified, and now you have a job title, and that's it. You just do what you do, and sure, you're still learning, but it's all in that one-way street that you're on. That doesn't give you much opportunity to be creative. However, if you continuously read outside of your discipline or your immediate area of focus, or you socialize with other professionals who engage with different things, you're going to hear and acquire a lot of information and perspectives that are different to your own. And sooner or later, you won't be able to help yourself. You're going to see connections. You're going to join the dots. You're going to go, ooh. And so step number one is join dots, acquire dots any which way you can. YouTube instructional videos, networking groups outside of your professional realm, reading, podcasts, you name it. Just get out there and expose yourself to a broader range of information. The next thing is that you also need to surround yourself with people who actually give you a chance to be creative. So you don't want to be around judgmental naysayers all the time. You need positive people who are prepared to say, hey, what if? And hey, let's try that. But you also don't want to be around people who are yes men, who just agree with everything you say. You want people who are going to stimulate you and say, really? How? Or why is that even important? Or I don't see the application, explain. These kind of, almost antagonistic friends push us to dive deeper and to delve deeper and to discover more. I mean, again, it's Einstein who said, if you can't explain your great new idea in one simple sentence, you haven't thought about it hard enough. So, your immediate social and human environment is incredibly important. And actually, we've got more control over that stuff than we think. And then the third thing is you just need to really make the time. We're all so busy, but if you analyze it, those 3 hours a day you're wasting on social media, scrolling aimlessly, feeling bad about your miserable life because whatever, could be way better spent reading, talking, thinking, just literally sitting on a chair, looking at the sky and watching the clouds change shapes. That's going to do more for you than scrolling for half an hour through your Facebook feed.
Right. So to recap, we have lifelong learning, surrounding yourself with creative people, and actually committing to taking the time.
Right. What I most often say to people is that it's not a shortage of ideas that stops people being creative. It's like we don't have an ability to start on anything related to them. And that's, if you can follow those three things, you will acquire that ability to start.
What do you think about having the practice of creative journaling and keeping a journal for practicing creativity?
I think it's great because, sooner or later, what's going to happen is you're going to wake up and start journaling, and without any, what seems to you, conscious pressure, you're going to start going strange places that you hadn't really thought about. You'll enhance your skill set. You will also provide yourself with a timeline of experience and references that you can go back and mine and double check and think about and compare and contrast. And you will also become a lot more conscious of your day-to-day experience. And it's very difficult to separate being more creative in life from being more mindful, more present in the moment. Because, wow, what better place to collect dots than just observing what's actually going on around you? And to observe, you must be present, you must be mindful. So I think journaling is really good for mindfulness because it really puts you, not so much when you're actually journaling, but when you're experiencing things, you need to journal about this. So you're going to pay attention. So it's one of those nice habits that has quite a lot of knock-on effects. So yeah, I think if that's something that's open to you, that you enjoy writing, you enjoy that kind of process and that structure, it's a really, I mean, you've heard of the morning pages, obviously, from The Artist's Way, and it's massively powerful and it can lead to enormous things.
If someone was trying to start writing in a creative journal, do you have some exercises or questions or prompts that you could recommend?
I think the most important thing is when you're starting out is don't decide what it's going to look like when it's finished. What's far more important is for you to actually start doing it every day for at least 3 weeks. So that means is that when you are doing it, you must have no opinion about the quality or the usefulness or even the purpose of what you're doing. So I think in those first 3 weeks of journaling, if you're writing about, I don't know what I'm doing, what is this? This is such rubbish. Here am I saying I can't write it, write that, write that down. Write about the book, the stupid pen, or whatever, write about, I woke up feeling a bit weird, but just write, because you've got to break through the physical resistance to this new habit. You've got to habituate your mind, your body, your hand, when last did you write? You get all of that stuff back online, and that requires time. And all too often, when we're following all this wonderful advice about, strict goal setting and mapping out every step along the way, what goes by the wayside is the pleasure in it and the free will in it. And so much judgment comes online should you miss any one of those little milestones that even derails you and stops you from doing it. So the quality doesn't matter. The quantity really does. And the ongoingness of the action really, really matters. So that would be my advice, is just start. Don't worry about what you're really actually doing here or what it is you're supposed to be writing about. Write anything, literally. You could literally write, don't know how you'd spell any of that, but so that you are pushing your pen or you're typing on your keyboard for a defined period of time, and then repeat, 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 repeat.
So more going into free writing and actually practicing this habit rather than being concerned about answering some questions or some prompts.
You need to get your skills up so that when you get to the answering questions, you can, and it's not frustrating, which makes you stop.
I have a lot of people who also reach out to me and they say, Alex, I have this huge resistance of starting to write. How can someone who is already resistant find at least a push or a nudge to start writing?
Well, without knowing why they have so much resistance, that's difficult to answer. However, I could guess, I can guess that at school someone told them that they couldn't, and that their handwriting was ugly and, whatever. And I think the first thing for anyone to remember is a bit like what I said earlier on, is that, no world-renowned writer of any worth started out that way. And point number two, you don't have to show this to anybody. In fact, this is not my normal advice, but if we're talking about journaling and resistance, I would even recommend you ritually burn it or tear it up when you're finished to ensure nobody could see it. It's yours. And if it's an interesting one. You're saying you want to do this, but you've got a lot of resistance to doing it. So it'd be a really good question to ask yourself, what the hell's actually going on there? Like, do you really want to do this? When I used to work with bands, I had this 2-step thing to getting to the bottom of why things weren't working. And those 2-step questions were, what do you want? And that's easy to answer. And then the second answer is, what are you prepared to do to get it?
Mm-hmm.
And, when people start just throwing loads and loads of obstacles up, my first reaction is, okay, but then do you really want this thing? These are the steps. This is the way. So are we actually asking the right questions here? Is that really what you want? And so for people who are saying they want a journal and are saying they've got a huge resistance to writing, it's like, do you really want a journal? And what does that even mean? So, okay, you don't want to write, but are you prepared to speak into a voice recorder every day for 5 minutes and save those?
Mm-hmm. So basically, give yourself permission to be creative, give yourself permission to break through that resistance and to bring out that creativity.
Yeah, you got to suspend judgment about what you're doing. So, I'm just going to do this until, I don't know, till it becomes obvious what's going on.
Mm-hmm. I also want to remember the 2 questions that you mentioned. So what do you want and what are you prepared to do for it?
Yeah. Otherwise, can be expressed in a more short way as how much do you want it?
Yes, because I think maybe for someone who would like to enhance their creativity, what are they prepared to do for that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a question you can apply to anything. You know, it's like, what do you want? I want to be CEO. Okay. How much do you want it? Are you going to get an MBA? Are you going to work extra long hours? Are you going to fight the political fights? And, you know, the more no's that crop up in that, you've got to start asking, well, are you sure that's what you really want?
I think this is a brilliant exercise in itself for people to journal on these two questions and to see what creative ideas come from there on whatever goal they have.
It's actually quite related. While we were talking, the connection just went off in my head to the 5 whys.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to get to the root cause of anything, ask yourself why 5 times. So if you've got resistance to journaling, why? And then you're going to give an answer, and then you say, okay, so why is that important or true? And then why? And then why? Until eventually you're going to come down to something where you can't actually explain anymore. It's just like, well, it's this. It's like, okay, now we know why. And then you can ask yourself, well, is that actually even important?
Yeah.
Or, you know, or is it so important that that's why I need to start journaling?
I think that's also a really great practice to journal on and write about why things that we want to achieve or things that we want to bring into our life. Why do we want it? But also, why are we not doing something towards that? What is preventing us from doing that? And I think this actually makes me think about curiosity as being such a powerful ingredient of creativity. And I think just having, again, this courage and this permission to give yourself to ask questions, be curious all the time.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember here is, I mean, we keep on talking about saying asking permission, suspending judgment. You've got to remember that those are keys to unlocking our natural state. You know, because the way we've come to live, thanks to Henry Ford and his factory assembly line, is not natural. You know, human beings are naturally curious. We are naturally going out to see what's going on so we can figure it out. If you want to figure something out, you can't be judgmental. You've got to be observant. But because of the requirements of the industrial age, that approach was undesirable because, you know, highly tuned, expensive machinery running within very few narrow tolerances doesn't require a highly curious person mucking about with it. It requires someone who's just going to do their job. And somewhere along the line, we started to identify very heavily with those job descriptions, and we've walked away from all this stuff. So when we say give yourself permission, so yeah, you know, in the context that we're coming from, yes, give yourself permission. But I prefer to think of it as like, you know, just, yeah, you've got to take ownership of what you are.
Yes, take ownership of what you are and who you are. That's brilliant. So you are a writer, I'm a writer, and we always hear about this scary thing called the writer's block.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation for getting unstuck when we hit writer's block? And do you think this is something that can be done on our own, or should we look for guidance to someone else?
Writer's block doesn't exist. People become blocked because they haven't acquired enough dots, or their skill set isn't high enough, or they've been busy producing non-stop for a long period of time and the tank is empty. And instead of just pushing out into the world, now it is time for you to go out into the world and start taking in. You know, that's different to writer's block. That's just exhaustion. You know? So I think, and also, you know, it's actually funny. People always say, "Oh, you're a poet, and then you're a musician." And I also muck around with sculpture and drawing, and I've made films and I've made TV programs. And I go, "You're so creative." The thing is, if you find someone who is a highly skilled individual, particularly in the arts, and that's the thing they're well known for, you will often find, like 80% of the time, that they're also really good at something else, because it's about the mindset. And so that's why I don't believe in writer's block, because it's about a mindset. If you are creatively activated, well, then you're just going to go and garden and come up with like lovely configurations of flowers, or you're going to help friends solve a challenge in their life when they can't figure out this problem. And in doing that, the writing thing comes back. It is an ebb and a flow. Because again, it's an open-ended system. You can't expect to just be chucking out in one direction 100% of the time without sooner or later grinding to a halt. That's not writer's block. That's just biology. You've got to look after yourself, so instead of seeing it in these massive, absolute siloed terms, think about it as an open-ended system that moves in a spiral. And if you've got to, while you're putting out, you've got to be putting in somewhere along the line as well. And once you've got that understood and internalized, you'll find you get blocked a lot less.
That's such brilliant advice, because I think people should actually take notes while they're listening to this podcast. I am taking notes here. So this is really, really, really interesting. And I want to move now into more of the business entrepreneurial area, because I was watching a few months ago the documentary on Netflix, The Creative Brain. And just to sum it up, it gives 3 important recommendations for people to bring more creativity, such as trying something new and pushing your limits and not being afraid of failing. So now, reflecting this into the business world and for entrepreneurs, how can leaders develop their creative brain, and how is that going to help them?
Well, I mean, the first 2 of their 3 are the same thing, right? Keep on collecting dots, right?
Yeah.
The second one is, the last one is interesting, because it's such a buzzword at the moment, fail forward and what. But unfortunately, I have to agree with that. When you succeed, you don't learn anything new. It's like, okay, that worked. Great. I knew that. Now I know it. Do it again and again. I still know it. Great. When you fail, you're like, oh, that didn't work. That's interesting. Why not? And then you learn. And so, there's that silly saying, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, because the losing puts you into a new space. And so in business, especially now, everyone's constantly talking about disruption and innovation. And you can't do that from a place of safety, from a place of security and knowledge. You've got to step into experimentation, into uncertainty, into unpredictability, to be able to push the boundaries of anything. So in order to be able to push yourself beyond your limits, you've got to unattach yourself from your idea of your limits. You've got to release judgment about who you are and what you're capable of, and you've got to just get busy. So, I think it's part of me kind of resents what's going on with this whole entrepreneurship, startup incubators, kind of startup ecosystems, because on a certain level, all they're doing is replicating corporate attitudes dressed up in jeans and sneakers. Because once again, we are idolizing the successful people without actually examining the process. And so we tend to want to copy how Elon Musk does things because that works, when in actual fact, we'd be far better served by analyzing what Elon Musk got wrong than what he got right, because we're not Elon Musk. So for me, the whole business sphere is a lot more interesting because, well, not a lot more interesting, but it's just so different because there's always this idea of value. You've got to deliver value. And then what does that even mean? Value to whom? And how much? So I see enormous value in everything that I do. But to be perfectly honest with you, trying to get big companies to buy into the idea of training their people to be more creative, they don't see the value in that. Because it violates their command and control approach, or because I can't really tell them exactly what that'll result in, and so on and so on. I know there's immense value because the company I'm talking to is probably founded on a piece of unique intellectual property, i.e. a creative artifact. And that's in fact how they make their money, by having unique pieces of IP. But they sit so at distance from that knowledge that they can't see the benefit of getting everybody to think in a way that generates more IP, more intellectual property.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting challenge that happens with businesses, and actually seeing the value of soft skills and things that can't be measured. Can you measure creativity?
No. Yeah, and often, the most simple ideas are the best ones. That silly story about the cleaning lady at a big pharmaceuticals company who's turned around to the CEO and said, "You want to sell more talcum powder? Just make the holes in the top bigger."
Yeah, that's
so. Yeah.
Creativity. Yeah, exactly. Creativity coming from the practice, creativity coming from actually expanding your universe and lifelong learning, as you mentioned, and actually allowing everything that is happening to come to you and to feed yourself with these kind of situations and circumstances, instead of just staying blinded in one path. Yeah. I love that. And I feel like we could go on and on for many hours, but I think there's so much to discuss around creativity. But there is a set of questions that I have for all my guests at the end. But before we get into them, I just wanted to say thank you again for all the brilliant tips and tricks that you gave us today, and for all the amazing work that you're doing. I can't wait to hear maybe one of your music. Do you have somewhere your music or your poetry?
Yes, so we could share some links so that everybody can go check that out. Absolutely.
Awesome. And I invite everyone that is listening to connect with David, because there are so many creative ideas that you will get just even by just following him.
Thank you.
So David, what are you grateful for?
Phew, being alive, basically. We live in interesting times.
So true. How do you impress yourself?
How do I impress myself? By showing up when I don't really want to.
I hope this wasn't the case for this podcast.
No. That was getting up and doing my exercises this morning.
Yes, that is always a really big point in impressing yourself. And what is your definition for living your impressivity?
Living your
impressivity.
Ah, yes. Oh, you've just got to do what you've got to do. I mean, the buzzword at the moment is authenticity. You got to be authentic. I'm like, yeah, but without all the buzzword nonsense, which means you've got to figure out who you are, and then you can live it. And yeah, you will discover it by living it, but at some stage you're going to have to fine tune it. So yeah, you got to be who you are and do what you do, and discover who you are by doing it.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, David.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast Live Your Impressivity Show. I'm Alex Badita, and I'm really happy that you are here until the end. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review, and let us know what other topics would you like to hear more about. If you want to connect with David, you can find all the links to his social media and his website in the description below. And if you want to find out more about creativity, let us know what other resources would be helpful for you, and we can make that happen. Until next time, stay impressive.